In the metals quadrant today, copper up 1.6% from the close to the highs, pulling back a little bit as it always does, but not much at all. Still around 1.37% as we near the close. Short-term rally is up above key moving averages now. These are short-term moving averages. Doesn't necessarily mean that we've shifted the trend, but in the short term, the downtrend in copper has gotten that much weaker. Part of the reason is Chilean supply. Chile is the largest miner of copper. China's the largest smelter of copper and the largest consumer. The most quantity of the actual raw metal comes out of Chile. And there's been protests by laborers and those that support laborers in the Chilean mines that continue to plague the supply side story. The protests could result in fewer investments in Chilean mines by the companies that actually go into Chile to pull the copper out and send it over to the smelting countries like China. So if that actually happens, if the protests discourage capital investments in the mines going forward, that supply could shrink, and this is kind of boosting the price. But overall, you're getting divergence in copper from most of the other stories. We have a little bit of trade pessimism, not much, but there's some unnamed sources coming out of China, according to reports, that are saying that China's kind of pulling back a tiny bit on this phase one deal because of the U.S. insistent that they go back to some of the May 15th agreements. If you remember, that May 15th deal that was supposedly, according to the U.S. sources, abandoned by China, which pushed all risk assets lower in the first place. They're asking for those kinds of concessions again in order to roll back tariffs. The U.S. is asking China to go back to that deal. But copper's rallying anyway, so that's pulling back from that. Plus, the dollar is actually a little bit stronger. There's an inverse relationship between the dollar and copper, and with the dollar stronger, you should see copper a little bit weaker, all else equal. That's not happening either. So it leads me to believe, I don't have any sources on this, but leads me to believe that copper is actually getting bought on the idea that the trade pessimism from the unnamed sources isn't necessarily legitimate. Some of the other risk assets are responding to that. The S&P might be, crude oil might be, NASDAQ is not, the Russell is not, and it looks like copper is not as well.